Hello, my name's Honora. I'm a heart surgeon. But none of that mattered the night my sister called security to drag me out of an operating room while her husband was dying. She said I wasn't qualified. The same sister who erased my name from our mother's will, who told our family I only got my job because of hospital politics, not skill. They believed her, even after I saved lives, even after I saved his. You ever wonder what it's like to be good, really good, at something, and still be invisible in your own family? To stand in the room you were born to lead and be told to sit down, to be asked to prove yourself, not to strangers, but to the people who should have known you best. What would you do if the only way to be heard was to let someone almost die? And worse, what if it wasn't the first time they shut you out? It was still dark outside when I pulled into the hospital parking lot. The rain hadn't stopped since midnight, steady, cold, the kind of drizzle that seeps into your bones. I sat in the driver's seat for a full minute after turning off the engine, watching droplets collect and slide down the windshield, unsure why I felt like I didn't belong here. I was wearing my scrubs. My badge, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery, was tucked beneath my coat. Still, my gut told me I'd be seen as something else today, something less. When I walked through the glass doors of Cascade Heart Institute, the receptionist didn't look up. That wasn't unusual. I passed her often during late-night shifts. I headed straight toward the ICU wing, my sneakers quiet against the tile floor. Everything smelled like antiseptic and machine oil. Familiar, grounding. Yet today, it felt like I was walking into a room I wasn't invited to. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message lit up from the family group chat. "Don't worry, I've got it handled. Vesperine. Handled." Like I hadn't spent 2 decades becoming one of the top cardiac surgeons on the West Coast. Silas was here, my brother-in-law, my sister's husband, the man I used to joke with during Christmas dinners, who once told me I had ice water in my veins, in a good way. Last night, he'd collapsed at home, chest pain, labored breathing. My gut told me it wasn't just anxiety like the last time, but I wasn't called. When I rounded the corner near the ICU, I spotted a nurse I knew, Miriam. We'd worked together on a few late-night cases. She smiled faintly when she saw me. "Dr. Washington, what are you doing here this early?" she asked. I stepped closer. "I just heard about Silas." Her face changed. Sympathy, then confusion. Before she could respond, the elevator behind us dinged. The doors opened. Out stepped Vesperine, in full control, as always, hair flawless, heels clicking like punctuation marks. She had Darian, our older brother, in tow, along with their teenage kids trailing behind. She clocked me instantly. "Oh, Honora," she said, eyebrows raised, lips tight. "You came." Miriam smiled, oblivious. "Your sister's already here, Dr. Washington." Vesperine turned toward her. "Yes, I asked her not to come, but I figured she'd show up anyway." And just like that, my title disappeared. I wasn't a surgeon. I was the baby sister who couldn't take a hint. "We already have a real cardiologist on the case," Vesperine added. "But thank you." Darian didn't say anything, just nodded awkwardly. I didn't flinch. Years of practice taught me how to let insults land without leaving bruises. But inside, something caved. It wasn't the first time this happened. Months ago, during a family Zoom call when Silas first started experiencing chest tightness, we were all brought into the discussion. Or so I thought. The screen was a grid of faces, Vesperine in her sleek home office, Darian looking like he'd just come from court, and me, in scrubs, fresh from surgery, dialing in from the hospital break room. "He's had some discomfort," Vesperine said, "but we've got a few options lined up." I had offered, gently, to review his charts, to consult. I didn't push. That's when Darian chimed in. "I think it's best if Honora doesn't get involved medically. Too much pressure on her and on Silas. We've got it under control." I hadn't said a word after that. Just clicked the red button and left the call. Now, standing in the hallway just a few feet from Silas's room, I felt that same pushback in the air. Invisible walls. I didn't follow them into the room. Instead, I walked past, down to the hospital's cafeteria. It was still early. The place was half empty. The smell of burnt coffee and reheated eggs didn't help my appetite. I sat alone at the corner table. I didn't know why I stayed. I had other patients. I had an office full of files, surgeries lined up, residents to mentor. But something inside me wouldn't let me walk away. Not this time. My fingers wrapped around the coffee cup. My mind wasn't on caffeine. It was on Silas's EKG, the way he described his last episode in a voicemail, the way he'd said, it felt like a bear sitting on my chest. I knew what that meant. I stood up and walked out of the cafeteria. By the time I returned to the ICU floor, Silas was being wheeled toward a cardiac suite. I stayed back, tucked into the corner. I didn't need to be in the middle to read what was happening. The monitor beeped. Rhythmic, yes, but too slow. Irregular spacing between waves. I knew what that was. I took 2 steps forward. Excuse me, I started. Vesperine turned, eyes sharp. Anora, stop. You're not involved in this. Please. The hallway went silent. The nurses looked at one another. Miriam stepped forward, hesitant. She's Dr. Washington, Chief of Cardiothoracic. Vesperine didn't blink. She's family. That's not the same as being part of his medical team. That was it, that moment. The one where I understood. Being right didn't matter. Credentials didn't matter. Experience didn't matter. Because if your own family didn't believe you, the rest of the world never had to. I didn't move, not right away. The air had gone thin, thinner than it should have in a hospital designed for critical care. I could still hear the beep of Silas's monitor around the corner, a rhythm I knew all too well. It was teetering on something dangerous. I leaned slightly, just enough to catch a glimpse. The spacing between the peaks wasn't right. He's heading toward VTAC, I said to the closest nurse. You need to prep the crash cart. She turned to me, uncertain. Before I could explain further, the sound of heels, sharp, fast, purposeful, cut through the corridor. I knew that gait. It had preceded almost every undermining moment of my childhood. Vesperine rounded the corner and saw me mid-sentence. Her face snapped into that high-polished PR mask she'd mastered years ago, but her eyes, they were already angry. Stop right there, she barked. You are not authorized to touch him. She said it so loudly, it echoed. People stopped walking. A few nurses looked up from their stations. One orderly paused with a wheelchair mid-roll. I turned toward her, hands calmly by my sides, voice steady. I'm the chief of cardiothoracic surgery. This is my OR. Vesperine laughed, just once, but it was cold and flat. You're his sister-in-law. You're not treating him. That's inappropriate, and frankly, unprofessional. A nurse beside me shifted awkwardly. She's Dr. Anora Washington, she said softly. She's the chief. That was the moment Vesperine crossed the invisible line between territorial and outrageous. She turned to the same nurse and said, Call security. Now. My mouth didn't move, but my pulse spiked. I looked around. 2 doctors from another wing had paused in the hallway. One of them knew me from a previous case. He didn't say a word. My niece, Julia, 15, impressionable, sharp-tongued like her mother, peeked around the corner from the waiting area. Her voice wasn't loud, but the silence made it ring louder than it should have. Mom says Aunt Anora just plays doctor at fancy dinners. A ripple passed through my chest, not of pain, but something heavier, something like loss. That kind of comment doesn't just sting. It confirms every moment of erasure you've quietly swallowed for years. The security guard arrived quickly, young, uncertain, eyes flicking between me and my sister. His hand hovered near his belt, not threatening, just unsure what to do. This wasn't a bar fight or a trespasser. This was 2 well-dressed women in a sterile hallway, one holding a medical badge, the other holding control of the narrative. I turned to him. I'm not resisting, but I want it noted that I am the senior medical authority in this department, and I was removed under non-medical instruction. He blinked. I wasn't sure if he understood the weight of what I'd just said, but the nurse did. She gave me the smallest nod, almost imperceptible, like a silent handshake. I handed her my ID and said quietly, Please, keep an eye on that monitor. You'll know when it's time. And then I stepped away. As I passed through the double doors, escorted like some trespasser in a place where I'd saved more lives than I could count, my mind pulled me backward, to another corridor, another time, not so long ago. It was the same hospital wing, different floor. My mother had been admitted after a massive stroke. I had just finished a 10-hour shift when I got the call. I arrived in scrubs, hair tied back, eyes tired but alert. I wasn't allowed into the room. Family shouldn't treat family, Vesperine had said, standing between me and the door. Dad nodded behind her, arms folded, silent but complicit. We've got the best neurologist on staff handling it. You're exhausted. Go home. I didn't go home. I sat in the hallway for 5 hours while my mother coded twice. They revived her the first time, not the second. Back in the present, the elevator doors closed behind me with a soft thud. The walk to the lobby was slow. I wasn't in a hurry to go anywhere. My hands shook only slightly, my thoughts racing but organized. I wasn't angry, not yet. There wasn't room for anger, not when you're carrying so much history on your back. When I reached the main atrium, I paused by the windows. The rain hadn't stopped. People passed by with umbrellas, the street slick with early morning reflections. A couple argued quietly near the vending machines. A janitor hummed an old jazz tune as he mopped the floor. My phone buzzed. It was a message from one of the junior residents. Heard about the scene on 3rd floor. You okay? I didn't respond. Instead, I sat on one of the padded benches and pulled out my notebook. I wrote down the time, 9:12 a.m. Then one line beneath it. Removed from OR by sibling. Patient's vitals unstable. I closed the book. That's when the crash alarm rang through the speakers. Or 3, Silas's room. I stood slowly. No rush, no panic. Just the cold, inevitable truth unfurling inside me. If he dies, it won't be because we didn't have the tools. It won't be because we lacked knowledge, training, or skill. It'll be because I wasn't allowed to do my job. My heels echoed faintly on the tile as I turned down a quiet hall, away from the chaos of OR3. I needed space, just a moment to think clearly, to breathe in air that hadn't been ripped apart by sirens or egos. I slipped into the small chapel tucked between radiology and the staff lounge. It was barely lit, just the soft glow from a stained glass window and a row of fake candles someone had thoughtfully turned on. No one else was inside. I sat in the 3rd pew, far enough from the door that I wouldn't be interrupted, close enough to the exit in case I needed to run. That's when my eyes landed on the crucifix above the altar. Not because I was particularly religious, my relationship with faith had always been rocky, but because it felt familiar, static, like it had been waiting for me. And with that stillness, the memory came crashing in, uninvited but inevitable. 10 years ago, same hospital, different floor. It was just after midnight when my phone rang. I had finished a double shift and barely made it into bed when I saw the call from Darian. "Mom's had a stroke," he said. "It's bad." I didn't pack, I didn't eat, I didn't call ahead. I threw on clean scrubs, clipped on my hospital badge, and caught the next flight from San Diego to Seattle. I was 2 months out of residency and 1 month into my first real attending position. I felt like I was finally becoming something more than the smart one in the family. I was becoming the reliable one. When I arrived at Cascade, the staff knew who I was. I had rotated through here during med school. My mother's name alone was enough to open doors. Eliora Washington had been a nurse here for 26 years. Everyone had loved her, except apparently when it mattered most. I found the ICU and walked briskly toward her room. I saw the red light above the door flashing. Code stroke, priority 1. My hand was already outstretched to push open the door when I heard a voice behind me. "Honora, wait." It was Vesperine. Hair done, makeup immaculate, not a crease in her blazer, always camera ready, even at death's doorstep. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "You're too close to this." "Of course I'm close," I snapped. "That's Mom in there." "That's exactly the point," came another voice. Our father, Wendell. He looked older than I remembered, more tired. He didn't meet my eyes. "We've got the best neurologist handling it. You've been flying. You're exhausted. Let the professionals take care of her." I looked down at the scrubs I had changed into at the airport. I could still smell antiseptic from my duffel bag. The irony didn't escape me, dressed to save lives, forbidden to touch the one that mattered most. "I am a professional," I said. "You're her daughter," Vesperine replied, tilting her head like I was being unreasonable. So, I stood there, next to the crash cart, watching strangers do what I'd been trained to do, what I knew I could do better. My hands clenched the metal rail of the cart so tightly they ached. I didn't cry. Not until later. I watched through the glass as Mom's body jerked slightly. Monitors screamed. Doctors rushed in. I knew the rhythm. They were behind. They were fumbling. She coded. And they didn't bring her back. I sat in the hallway for what felt like a lifetime. Nobody came to get me. Nobody said, "She's gone." I just knew. I could read it on the nurses' faces when they exited the room, eyes cast downward. Later at the funeral, I stayed quiet. Let Vesperine give the eulogy. Let Dad shake hands and nod solemnly like a man who had done his part. I stood next to the casket, frozen, unsure if I was mourning her death or my own helplessness. But the worst came after. We were at the wake, the house filled with casseroles and whispers. I overheard my father speaking to a neighbor over a glass of cheap scotch. "Honora tried, bless her heart," he said. "But Vesperine's always been the one we could count on." That sentence. It split something in me I didn't know could break. Back in the chapel now, my fists curled into themselves again, like they had around the crash cart. My gaze returned to the crucifix. The wood seemed to glow faintly as daylight broke behind it. "It's happening again," I whispered. "I'm about to lose someone else because I let them decide I don't belong." I didn't need anyone to tell me Silas was critical. I could feel it. Every part of my training screamed it. And still, here I was, in a chapel, like a guest at someone else's emergency. My pager buzzed on my hip, a vibration that jolted me back to the present. I glanced down. Code blue, or number 3, cardiac arrest. My heart didn't race. My body didn't panic. I simply stood up, straightened my coat, and walked toward the door. Because some moments don't need a choice. They demand action. I moved fast, but not recklessly. Years of trauma-trained precision kept my steps focused, my head clear. I followed the sounds, boots pounding tile, intercom calls slicing the air, one voice rising over the others, frantic and familiar. Code blue. Or 3. Silas. Technically, I had been escorted off the floor. Unofficially, I still knew this hospital better than most of the staff working that shift. I knew the back hall that looped behind pre-op, the service entrance the night janitors used, the shortcut through the linen supply to avoid the waiting room. I wasn't trying to sneak in. I was trying to cut time. As I turned the corner, I caught sight of the double doors to OR3, red light glowing above. The crash team was in place. Nurses swarmed. I could see the compression bag pumping oxygen through the window, someone straddling Silas's chest doing CPR. I stepped forward. "Honora!" Dr. Lynn's voice stopped me mid-stride. She was one of the attendings from a different service. We had worked together on a few complex cases. She was competent, respected, and usually unshakable. She was blocking the door. "You're not authorized today," she said. Her tone wasn't cruel, just procedural. "I can't let you inside." I kept my voice low. "I'm not here to claim a case. I'm not here to make a point. But he's coding, and I know his history better than anyone in there. I can't break protocol." I took one step closer. "I'm not asking you to break anything. I'm asking you to trust your instincts as a doctor. You know they're behind. You know they're missing something." She hesitated. "That's all I needed." "I'm not trying to be the hero," I said. "I'm trying to stop a funeral." And then, just over her shoulder, I heard a voice that I had hoped, just for today, I wouldn't have to hear again. "Oh, for God's sake, is she still here?" Vesperine. She moved with the same entitled stride she always had, like the world owed her space just for existing. She wore grief like a costume, expensive, dramatic, and made for an audience. "I thought we dealt with this already," she said to Dr. Lynn. Then she turned to me. "Why are you still trying to be part of this? You're not needed. You're not wanted." "I'm the chief of cardiothoracic surgery," I said. "If this was anyone else, you'd be thanking me for coming back." "This isn't anyone else," she snapped. "This is my husband. And he's a patient now." She stepped closer, lowered her voice so only I could hear her. "You never did learn when to walk away." And then, as if some teenage intern wanted to play God, I heard it. Just loud enough to pierce through the chaos. "She's only chief because they needed a black woman for PR," he said. I didn't turn to look at him. I didn't need to. The voice was new, some fresh-faced resident trying to impress Vesperine or whoever he thought mattered in that hallway. He didn't realize the weight of his words, or maybe he did. The heat hit my chest first, not rage, not even sadness. It was the familiar feeling of being swallowed whole by a system that smiled while it buried you. I kept my eyes on Vesperine. She, of course, didn't flinch, not a word of correction, not even a glance. "So this is what you think?" I said. "That everything I've worked for was given to me to fill a diversity quota?" She shrugged, eyes cold. "I think some people get lucky, and others pretend that luck means they're special." There it was. The truth she never admitted. The seed planted years ago finally sprouting in full view. "You want to know why you weren't included?" she asked, stepping even closer. "Because you always make things about you. This isn't about your credentials. This is about Silas. You're not good enough for this. That degree, it's a trophy, not a tool." I could have screamed. I could have rattled off every patient I'd saved, every night I stayed on call, every accolade I'd earned that she'd never bothered to acknowledge. But I didn't. Because something inside me shifted. I didn't see her as a threat anymore. I saw her for what she really was. A woman terrified of losing control, desperate to keep her place at the top of a family ladder she built out of lies and selective memory. "You think I need your permission to matter," I said quietly. But I never did. She blinked, and I turned. Dr. Lin was still standing at the door, torn between rules and reason. "If he dies because you kept me from helping," I told Vesperine over my shoulder, "your name will be the first on the report, not mine." No response, just silence. I walked away, past the crash carts, past the tense interns, past the looks from nurses who didn't know whether to salute or apologize. When I passed the nurses' station, I saw Claire, the unit's head nurse. She was good, fair, and more importantly, quietly defiant when it counted. I slipped my badge into her palm. "If he flatlines again," I said softly, "page me, no matter what my sister says." She nodded once, tightly. No promises, but I saw it in her eyes. She knew the stakes. The badge left my hand without hesitation. Claire slipped it into her coat pocket like we'd rehearsed the move 100 times. I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. Her nod told me she understood everything I couldn't afford to say out loud in a hallway thick with power plays and silence. I walked slowly back toward the staff lounge, just past the elevators. It was one of the few quiet corners on this floor, tucked behind radiology and half forgotten by visitors. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the hum of the hospital ever present, even when no one spoke. I eased into one of the cushioned chairs in the corner, trying not to make a sound as I sank into it. My palms rested on my thighs, fingers spread, eyes unfocused. The monitor above the hallway entrance blinked green, then red, then back again. I stared at it without really seeing. My phone buzzed once. A text. "Are you okay?" Another one. "They said you got into it with your sister again." Then another. "What's happening in OR3? I didn't answer any of them. I was tired of explaining myself to people who should have known better, tired of justifying being in rooms I had earned the right to stand in. I leaned forward and folded my hands together, locking my fingers. "I've saved more lives than I've been given credit for," I murmured to myself. That ends today. My mind drifted back, uninvited, to another wound still fresh beneath the surface, one that never quite healed. During my last year of fellowship, I had poured my entire existence into a cardiac surgical technique, something that could reduce procedural time during high-risk triple bypass operations. I tested it, documented it, drafted the abstract in a sleep-deprived haze over a week of night shifts. I presented it, with trembling hands but steady data, to my supervising surgeon. 2 months later, that same technique was published. Under his name, I was not even mentioned. When I brought it up, I was met with a flat stare. "You're talented, Honora," he said, "but ideas don't belong to anyone until they're accepted by someone else. Let this one go." I reported him. The committee called it a misunderstanding. No formal action taken. They offered me a research assistantship to make it right. The technique saved dozens of lives. It was adapted by hospitals across 3 states. And still, when my name came up, it was always, "She's promising, a strong second." I blinked, returning to the lounge, my hands now clenched. 1 year after that theft, I received a call from a federal liaison. A U.S. senator had collapsed mid-speech, and they needed a surgical team discreetly flown in. I was selected for the team. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then I thought maybe someone had finally recognized my value. The operation was high profile, high stakes, and successful. CNN ran a segment 2 days later. The headline read, "Young surgeon helps save senator's life in midnight procedure." I sent the link to our family group chat. No one replied, not a single emoji, not even a thumbs up. I stood from the chair, jaw tight, enough floating in old wounds. I needed clarity, action. I walked back toward the nurse's station, this time with no badge, no chart, and no mask of calm. "I need to see the vitals from OR3, I said to the nurse at the terminal. She blinked. "You're not on his case." "I'm not asking you to print them. I'm asking you to turn the screen so I can see it." "I'm sorry, Dr. Washington, but—" "You can withhold data," I said, my voice measured. "But you can't block my line of sight. I'm standing right here. Do what you need to. I'll read what I need to." There was a pause. She didn't move the screen, but she didn't turn it away either. It was enough. That's when I saw Darian round the corner, jacket draped over one shoulder, eyes already tired before we even spoke. "Anora," he sighed. "Not today, Darian. I just want to keep the peace." "You mean the illusion of peace?" He set his jacket down. "I know Vesperine's hard, but this isn't about her. It's always been about her. About you backing her. About no one ever asking what I see, what I know." He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Can't this wait?" I took a step closer. "Every time you've said that, someone got hurt. When Mom had her stroke, you said the same thing. Let's not rock the boat. You remember how that ended, right? Now Silas is in that room, and you're still hoping quiet will fix what silence caused." His eyes fell. He didn't have a response. I turned from him before he could manufacture one. Vesperine stood near the hallway's far end, watching, arms folded, one foot tapping softly on the linoleum like she was waiting for a show to end. I walked toward her, no hesitation left in my stride. "You want to control the narrative?" I asked. "Fine, but if Silas codes again, I'm not waiting for permission. I'm going in." "That's not a warning, Vess. That's a fact." She didn't move. She just stared at me, lips slightly parted, like she'd finally run out of words or realized I wasn't bluffing. For once. The hallway phone rang. Everyone froze. The nurse picked it up, nodded once, then turned to me. "Dr. Washington? OR3 is coding again." Claire didn't wait for approval. She moved with a kind of quiet decisiveness that only came from years of working in a place where delays cost lives. With one swift motion, she swiped her keycard and nudged the OR doors open just wide enough for me to slide in. No words passed between us. There wasn't time for them. Inside, it was chaos, a kind of organized desperation every trauma-trained surgeon knows intimately. One nurse was squeezing the ambu bag like her own breath depended on it, while another was cycling through epinephrine doses at intervals that already told me they'd misread the rhythm. The attending, someone I vaguely remembered from a conference in Vancouver, stood at the head of the table, barking orders in a voice that was just one octave short of panic. No one noticed me at first. I moved to the side, grabbed a pair of sterile gloves from the dispenser, and pulled them on with practiced precision. I reached for the surgical mask hanging around my neck, then adjusted my scrub cap. There was no drama in my entrance. Just control. Just purpose. "Who are you to step in?" the attending snapped, finally clocking me near the medication tray. I didn't answer. Instead, I reached into my left breast pocket, pulled out my hospital ID badge, and held it up, not at eye level, but above it, where the room would have no choice but to look. Gold trim, raised lettering. Dr. Anora E., Washington Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery. The room stopped. The attending blinked, recognition flooding his expression like someone had slapped sense into him. One of the residents, the same one who had whispered that PR line outside, turned pale. "You're the chief?" the attending asked, voice flat. I nodded once. "Yes, now hand me the scalpel." And just like that, the room reset. Someone moved aside. Someone else passed me the tray. I didn't look for their names, didn't wait for permission. I stepped in, eyes on the monitor, hands in motion. "Charge to 200, I said. "Push another 1 milliliter epi. And someone get me a full history. Stat. We're not flying blind here." I could feel the change in the air, not because I had demanded it, but because competence has a gravitational pull. When people know they're in the presence of someone who can lead, they listen. Not because they're told to, because it's survival. I called the first shock myself. It didn't bring him back. I called the second one 60 seconds later. On the third, the rhythm caught. It was faint, but it was real. Silas's heart, erratic and battered, started to beat on its own again. There was a murmur of disbelief, but no one dared interrupt. The attending had stepped back entirely now, watching in something between relief and shame. I stood over the table, gloved hands hovering near his chest, reading every inch of that monitor like it was an old journal I knew by heart. As the numbers began to normalize, my body finally registered how fast my own heart was racing. He was going to make it. We stabilized him, closed up, and handed post-op care to the ICU team. By the time I removed my gloves, the room had quieted into a functional rhythm, like a storm giving way to still water. I turned to the team and said, "Thank you, everyone. Good work." Not loud, not theatrical, just the words that should always be said when life is given a second chance. I stepped out of the OR, and the hallway greeted me like it knew something had shifted. Vesperine stood at the glass window. She hadn't moved since I walked in. Her eyes were fixed on the operating table, the one I'd just stepped away from. She looked as if someone had drained the color from her face. Her jaw clenched, but she didn't speak, not a sound, just stared. For once, I didn't feel like shrinking beneath her glare. She had no power here, not anymore. I walked past her without so much as a glance. She didn't follow, didn't protest. She simply stood there, silent and still, as if some invisible thread tying her to control had finally snapped. As I rounded the next corner, my mind drifted, briefly, to something I hadn't thought about in months. The letter. I'd found it stuffed inside one of Mom's old recipe books, tucked between a dog-eared page for meatloaf and a newspaper clipping about cholesterol. It wasn't addressed. Wasn't meant to be found, maybe. But the handwriting was unmistakable. It read, "Don't let them tell you who you are. They'll try. They always will. You were born to heal. You carry the hands of your grandfather and the fire of your grandmother. You're the last hope of this family. It's heart." My breath had caught when I read it the first time. Now, in the hallway, walking back toward the lounge, I felt its weight all over again. She had seen me. Even if no one else had, Silas's vitals were stable. He was going to recover. And Vesperine had been forced to watch the one person she tried to erase do the one thing no one else in that room could do. Outside the OR, one of the nurses, someone I hadn't worked with before, leaned toward a colleague and whispered just loud enough that I caught it. She just saved a man's life while being told she didn't belong here. I didn't stop walking. Didn't smile, didn't cry, but something inside me settled. Behind me, I heard the sound of knees hitting tile. Vesperine dropped right there in the hallway. When I heard the sound of her knees hitting the floor, I didn't turn around immediately. I didn't need to. The sound was heavy, not just from the physical weight, but from the collapse of something bigger. Her pride, her image, her carefully curated control. Vesperine, the sister who had stood taller in every room we were ever in together, now knelt in the same hallway where she'd tried to erase me, the same place she'd once raised her voice to silence mine. Now, it was her voice that cracked first. "Please," she whispered. I finally turned. Her eyes were wide, brimming. Redness flushed her cheeks, but not from embarrassment. It was fear, real fear. a kind she had never let herself wear in public. "I didn't know," she tried. "Honora, I didn't know you were—" I cut her off before she could finish crafting whatever sentence she'd planned to use to soften what she had done. "You knew," I said, calm, unshaken. "You just didn't care." Behind us, a few nurses had paused mid-shift, unsure whether to intervene or pretend they hadn't seen anything. The hallway fell so quiet, I could hear the overhead vent clicking on. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped, but in this space, all that existed was her on the ground, and me, finally not beneath her. She reached up as if to grab my hand, but paused, maybe realizing I wasn't going to bend down. "I was scared," she choked out. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I was scared he would die, and I didn't know what to do. You walked in there like it was nothing." "It wasn't nothing," I replied. "It was everything. That's why I walked in." She shook her head. "I thought if I just kept it contained, if I followed the process—" "No," I said, sharper now. "You thought if you kept me out of it, you'd be safe from looking wrong, from being the one who didn't have the answer. This wasn't about protocol, Vess. It was about control. Yours." Her shoulders caved inward, like someone had deflated her from the inside out. "Please, Honora," she whispered again. "Don't hate me." I didn't answer. Before I could even process what came next, I saw Darian approach, manila folder in hand, his expression unreadable. He paused between us, eyes flicking from my face to hers, then finally settled on me. "You should see this now," he said. He extended the folder toward me slowly, cautiously, like he was handing off something fragile, glass or grief. I took it without a word and opened it. Inside, there were 3 sheets. The last will and testament of our mother. The final version. My name wasn't there. Nowhere. Not even in the footnotes. The medical directive, assigned to Vesperine. The financial executor. Also her. And beneath it all, a digital signature. Neat. Cold. Sterile. It was like I had never existed. My chest didn't heave. My knees didn't buckle. I just stood there, reading it twice. Then once more, slowly, just to be sure I wasn't missing something. I wasn't. I remembered the earlier version, the one I'd seen 6 months before our mother passed. Her handwriting had been messy, but warm. She had circled my name beside medical power of attorney in pencil first, then traced over it in pen. She'd even written in the margins, "Honora understands my body, my heart. She will know what to do." I remembered because I'd cried the first time I read it. Now it was gone, replaced with a clinical legal form that bore no trace of her warmth, just a box to be filed, submitted, and executed. I looked up from the papers. "You erased me," I said quietly. "From her dying room, her decisions, and now her will." "I didn't," Vesperine began. "You did," I interrupted. "You chose to. And don't pretend like this was about trust or competence. You just wanted the final word. You wanted the last image of her to be you at her side. Not me." She stared, eyes watering, chin trembling. "I was trying to keep it simple." "No," I said. "You were trying to keep it yours." She tried to speak again, but I raised my hand. "I stood outside that ICU door while she died. I honored your boundary. I swallowed my instinct, and still, it wasn't enough. You couldn't just let her have one final decision that didn't include you in control. Now the hallway felt too full. I needed out." I turned to walk away, folder still in hand. Vesperine reached for me, grabbing the edge of my coat. "Please," she whispered again. "I didn't mean to ruin everything." I stopped, staring down at her hand on my arm. "You wanted me gone," I said. "Don't reach for me now that the light's on you." She released her grip. I didn't wait. I kept walking, slow, even steps toward the end of the hall. Each footfall felt like it belonged to someone else. A woman not built from permission, but from defiance. Someone who no longer needed to explain herself. Behind me, I heard Vesperine collapse again, not just her knees this time, but all of her. The sound of sobs too raw to be calculated followed me until I reached the corner. I didn't turn back. I didn't flinch. A voice whispered from the side, Claire again, I think, the nurse who had let me in earlier. That's what dignity looks like. I didn't smile, but I did keep walking. The hallway was still ringing with Claire's words as I turned the corner and walked back toward the recovery wing. The clock on the wall read 5:42 p.m. Outside, the sky was giving way to a hazy Seattle sunset, orange bleeding into gray as it settled beyond the distant Olympic Mountains. The weight of the entire day sat heavy on my shoulders, but my steps were steady. I passed through the post-op doors quietly. The recovery room was dimly lit, filled with the slow beeping of machines, the occasional hiss of oxygen, and the low murmur of nurses changing shifts. I didn't have to ask where Silas was. His was the only room with 2 nurses posted right outside and a cardiac consult note already clipped to the door. I paused for a second, collected myself, then pushed it open. Silas was lying in the hospital bed, IV lines taped neatly to his arms, monitors surrounding him in a half circle like a protective barrier. His eyes were closed. I took a slow breath, preparing myself for the usual post-op protocols when I saw his eyelids flutter, then open, and then land directly on me. "Honora?" he rasped. It wasn't a question, really, more a statement made with disbelief and gratitude laced in every syllable. "I'm here," I said softly, stepping closer. "You're okay." He blinked slowly, as if trying to process the fact that he was awake and alive. His gaze scanned the ceiling, then settled back on my face. The corner of his mouth twitched. "I remember. I was fading. And then I heard your voice," he whispered. His throat must have felt like sandpaper, but he forced the words out anyway. "I couldn't move. But I knew. I knew it was you. You saved me. Not her. You." He didn't have to say her name. We both knew who he meant. I pulled up the chair beside his bed and sat. I didn't speak right away. The silence felt fuller than any words could. Silas's hand moved slightly toward mine. I reached out, took it gently. It was warm, grounded. This was the moment I'd waited for all day. Not for validation, not even for the win, but for clarity. For the person whose life I had fought for to look me in the eye and say, without anyone else's permission, "You mattered." Inside, I thought, this thank you should have come from my family, from my father, my sister, my brother, but today, it came from the one who mattered most. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. My body held more strength than sorrow now. What hadn't broken in me had only sharpened. As Silas drifted back to sleep, I stood quietly, giving his hand one final squeeze before stepping out. In the hallway, through the glass, I saw her. Vesperine. Standing outside the recovery room. Alone. Her makeup had faded. Her eyes were puffy. And for once, no one stood beside her. No one deferred to her. The hallway that once bent around her presence now passed her by. Nurses nodded at me as I walked past. "Good save, Dr. Washington," one said. Another, someone I'd never met before, gave me a respectful nod and stepped aside. I didn't glance at Vesperine. I didn't need to anymore. She wasn't the gatekeeper now. She was a spectator. I walked further into the hospital corridor, my pace slow but solid. Every few steps, I caught snippets of conversation from staff, whispering in low tones. "That's her," someone murmured, "the surgeon they tried to block. She stepped in when no one else could." I didn't look over my shoulder. I didn't smile. But inside, I allowed the truth to settle where it belonged, not as vengeance, as acknowledgement. Minutes later, as I approached the physician wing, Darian was waiting by the elevators. He looked exhausted, physically, emotionally, spiritually. His suit was wrinkled, tie loosened, and he was holding his phone like it was both a burden and a shield. "I heard what happened," he said quietly. I didn't respond. "I didn't know it would go this far," he added. I finally looked at him, not with anger, not even disappointment, just the kind of clarity that comes from watching someone show you who they really are over and over again. "That's the problem," I said. "You never thought I would go far." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I didn't wait. Back in my office, the sun had dipped below the skyline, casting long shadows across the room. I locked the door behind me, walked to the desk, and opened the top drawer. There, nestled between a few loose paper clips and a forgotten pen, was the photograph. Me and Mom, both of us in white coats. She had her arm around my shoulder, pride lighting up her face in a way that cameras couldn't fake. She had tucked a small post-it into the frame months before she passed. Faded now, the ink barely legible. Be the doctor they say you can't be. I stared at it for a while, then reached into the drawer and took out a pen. On the back of the photo, I wrote a single word. Done. Then I set it upright on my desk where it belonged. My phone buzzed. Emergency consult. Cardiology. No rest today. I stood up, buttoned my coat, checked my pager, and grabbed my stethoscope from the hook. As I reached the door, I paused. I saved him because I said I would, I whispered to no one. And I wasn't done yet. 2 weeks passed, just enough time for everything to look normal again on the outside. The hospital ran its usual rhythms: early rounds, shift reports, coffee runs, hurried consults, patients were admitted, surgeries were scheduled. The same linoleum floors were buffed to the same shine that made it feel like nothing had ever happened, but everything had. The hospital's HR department scheduled Vesperine's hearing for the following Monday. It was clinical, procedural, by the book. I didn't attend. I didn't need to. The video footage had already done the talking. A hallway camera had caught the full exchange outside OR3, her yelling for security, my badge visible, the staff hesitating. Then the nurses' written statements filled in the rest. Claire's testimony was brief but clear. Her final sentence said it all. Dr. Washington did what needed to be done. We trusted her, and she saved him. The hospital barred Vesperine from any further involvement in patient care decisions. Her access to medical meetings was revoked. Her consulting agreement with the hospital's PR department was quietly dissolved. No press release. No internal memo. Just deletion. Around the same time, her PR firm's website updated. Her profile was gone. A week after the hearing, Silas visited me. He walked slowly, cautiously, favoring one leg just slightly. But his color had returned, and there was clarity in his eyes I hadn't seen in a long time. He knocked once before opening the office door. "I was told you'd probably say no to visitors," he said with a soft smile, "so I figured I'd take my chances." I stood and motioned for him to come in. He held a small box in his hand. "This is for you," he said, handing it to me. Inside was a silver pen engraved with my initials and the date of his surgery. It was simple, elegant. "I owe you my life," he said, "not just for the surgery, but for doing it after what she did, after how they treated you." I closed the box carefully and placed it on the desk. I did it because he needed me, not for applause. "I know," he said. "That's why it meant more." We hugged. Brief, real. Then he left, and I sat for a moment, holding the silence like something sacred. Later that evening, I checked my phone and saw a message from Darian. It was long, too long, full of phrases like, "I didn't realize," and "I thought you were okay with it," and "We all just wanted peace." There was a link to an article about sibling dynamics, an embedded quote about birth order, and even a vague reference to therapy. I read the whole thing. Then I typed back one sentence: "Some scars you don't fix with words." And I hit send. That night, I opened the old recipe book Mom had left behind. The page she had tucked her handwritten letter into was still marked with the same butter stain. I pulled the letter out and unfolded it slowly, even though I knew every word by heart. "Don't let them tell you who you are. And they'll try. They always will. You were born to heal. You carry the hands of your grandfather and the fire of your grandmother. You're the last hope of this family, its heart." I sat on my porch, a glass of wine in one hand, the letter in the other, and let the words settle again. This time, they didn't sting. They held me. Not because I still needed her permission, but because I had finally honored her vision. I cried, not out of pain, but out of peace. A day later, I heard from a mutual friend that Vesperine had recorded a voice message. I didn't get it directly, of course. It had been passed along by someone we both knew from our high school church group. I don't expect forgiveness, Vesperine said in the recording. But I wish I'd loved you better. I should have said that a long time ago. I never responded, not because I was angry, but because some things are better left unfinished. Not all doors have to be reopened. On Sunday morning, I drove alone to the cemetery. I parked beneath the tree where Mom's ashes had been scattered. It was early enough that the dew still clung to the grass and the wind hadn't yet picked up the usual Seattle drizzle. I sat down in front of her marker and pulled a small object from my coat pocket. It was a stethoscope charm, one she had given me in med school, engraved with our initials, E.W. to A.W. I placed it gently at the base of the stone. I didn't fix the family, I said aloud. But I kept my oath. No thunder rolled. No wind whispered back, but something in me finally settled. Back at the hospital that afternoon, I returned to my wing with quiet steps. I passed nurses who greeted me with soft nods, staff who no longer hesitated before calling me Chief. No more second-guessing, no more whispers. In the OR, my team was prepping for a routine triple bypass. I washed my hands, dried them, pulled on my gloves. One nurse asked, "You ready?" I nodded once. "Let's get to work." The lights overhead brightened. The room filled with the focused tension I had always loved. Everything was exactly where it needed to be. And so was I. My scars didn't disappear, but neither did I. Some scars never fade, but they don't have to define who we are. Honora's story reminds us that recognition doesn't always come from family. And sometimes, proving yourself means walking alone into the fire. But dignity, that's something no one can take from you. Have you ever been underestimated by your own family? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. And if this hit close to home, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true life stories every week.